Hi there. First off, I'll ask that you don't click through this forward, as it's important to listen to prior to this episode. I don't believe there's been an episode yet where I've truly felt it necessary to put in a forward. But with it, I want to dispel any prior notions you might have after reading the title and knowing what's coming. So I want to inform you of the direction this episode is going to take. With the recent school shootings in Nashville, I wanted to present the fact that on the 20th day of this month, April of 2023, it will have been exactly 24 years since the massacre at Columbine High School. And these things are still happening. Nothing the world has done has put a stop to these events, and this one should have been a lesson. While the world points its fingers at needed weapons reform and the further need for mental health resources for children in the United States, I'm not here to push that narrative. Not that I don't believe it's necessary, but the fact I want this story to be about the events and a memorial for the victims. Those that lost their lives by way of senseless, unadulterated, inhumane violence, and those casualties who suffered physically and to this day mentally and carry the events of that day with them for the rest of their lives. This episode is not a capitalization on recent events for the sake of downloads. I believe it's important to tell this story over and over again. Above all, I want you to feel this episode. I want you to feel sad, to feel rage, to feel compassion, but above all, to remember. Please stay around until the end of the episode, as I'll teach you about each victim to help us understand who they were, and that, with events like these, victims are not just names on a television screen or in a news article. This episode will be lengthy, and you will hear calls and actual audio recorded during the Columbine events. It's important that this event is never forgotten, and that we create a world where it's safe for children to go to school. Nothing I say can and will bring the victims of Columbine back, or heal those who are broken, but I can help ensure they are remembered. May they continue to rest in peace and never be forgotten, so that others may live. On the 20th of April, in 1999, in the town of Littleton, Colorado, the world changed as we knew it. Beginning with what sounded like fireworks, an event erupted that encompassed a student body, a town, a nation, the entire world. 2 assailants, members of the student population, went on a 58-minute murderous rampage through their school. A rampage that claimed the lives of 13 and the memories of those who survived that day forever. There's no right way to tell this story, and I hope I can do it, and the memories of the victims justice in its telling. I'm your host, Nick, and this is Chapter 37 of the Insidious Agenda podcast, the hardest story I've ever had to tell, bringing a nation to its knees. The Columbine Massacre. It doesn't matter anymore, Brooks. I like you. Get out of here. Go home. Those were the last words that Eric Harris ever spoke to his friend Brooks Brown, a senior at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. It's the 20th of April in 1999. Brooks had been walking out to the school's smoke pit before lunch when he encountered Eric Harris and his friend Dylan Klebold. It was a little bizarre to Brooks that both Eric and Dylan were dressed in trench coats and were pulling a large duffel bag from the trunk of Harris's car, a car which was parked nowhere near the designated spot it was supposed to be in. Even with the history they had, Brooks had come to expect strange behavior from Eric. For the past year, the boys vandalized his parents' house, made death threats against Brooks online, and had made many strange posts about building things like pipe bombs. One can hardly point a finger at Brooks Brown, who by that point would have had enough with Eric Harris. After their discussion, he chose to walk away rather than engage in any further fruitless conversation with Eric. As Brooks left the school's campus, that had, only a few years prior, undergone a $15 million renovation, he began to weigh his options for whether or not to skip class and head home for the day as Eric had told him to. What happened next was something no one could imagine. Was it the sound of fireworks? At 20 after 11 in the morning? No, it possibly couldn't have been, Brooks thought to himself. The first was a large bang, and then sounds that became more rapid and rhythmic, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. As his heart sunk into his chest and his stomach knotted up, Brooks Brown ran from door to door, scrambling to find a telephone. He had to tell the authorities. He had to tell someone. Columbine High School was under attack. Born on the 9th of April in 1981, Eric Harris was born to parents Wayne and Catherine Ann in Wichita, Kansas. His father worked for the United States Air Force as a transport pilot. As a result of that employment, the family moved around to 6 different stations during Eric's childhood. In 1993, as a result of forced cutbacks, Wayne was forced to retire and moved his family to Littleton, Colorado that July. It was the perfect place to go, as both he and his wife Catherine were from the state. Many of Eric's former schoolmates from before the move described him as a typical kid, with a father who only had a desire to raise 2 good sons, which of course were Eric and his brother Kevin, who was 3 years his senior. When he transferred into his new school, the Ken Carroll Middle School, Eric made a new friend in classmate Dylan Klebold. The pair were cut from the same cloth and spent a lot of time together. After living in rental accommodations for the first 3 years after their return to Colorado, the family moved into a $180,000 home near Columbine High School on Pierce Street. Taking the bus to school every day, Eric frequently chatted with fellow rider Brooks Brown, a student at the high school. Brooks was a boy that his friend Dylan had known since the 1st grade, but the pair had gone their separate ways when they attended different schools coming up. When enrolled in Spanish class, Eric also made friends with fellow student Nathan Dykeman, whom he later introduced to Dylan, and the group became fast friends. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born on the 11th of September in 1981 in Lakewood, Colorado, to parents Thomas and Susan. Both Dylan's parents were from Columbus, Ohio, and even attended the Ohio State University. Tom had a job as a geophysicist, while Sue worked with people who were handicapped. Dylan attended Normandy Elementary School in the town before transferring to Governor's Ranch Elementary when he finished up grade 2. Dylan was an extremely bright student, even being accepted into the Challenging High Intellectual Potential Students, or CHIPS program, which was a group for children who possessed a high intellect. They could learn as far and as fast as they wanted to. Unfortunately, this program might have been a bit of a detriment to him socially, as Dylan kept very quiet, to himself, and was shy, things that would follow him in a struggle after graduating out of the elementary school and coming to Ken Carroll Middle School. Dylan's parents weren't too concerned, as it's often a transitional struggle for most children after going between different academic institutions. Nonetheless, he made the best of it that he could, taking part in t-ball, baseball, and soccer. As mentioned, in the first grade he met Brooks Brown, and the two formed a bond in the Cub Scouts. In grade 7 or 8, he met classmate Eric Harris, and later Nathan Dykeman, becoming good friends with the other 3 boys. There was a bit of a duality between Eric and Dylan, with Eric being far more authoritative and a leader, where Dylan was more subjective, owing to his quiet and shyness, and was more of a follower. In 1995, all 4 transferred to Columbine High School together. Here, I'll focus our story on Eric and Dylan. While at Columbine, Dylan became very involved in the school. He loved being a part of the school's plays and productions, and even got involved with the Rebel News Network, which was the school's news outlet. He was even able to save one of the school's plays from going off the rails due to his quick thinking, and even helped out as a computer assistant, helping to maintain the school's computer servers. He was an avid lover of fantasy baseball, enamored with it. Even up until the day before April 20th, his friends even heard him talking about schedules coming up at the end of April his senior year. They never could have anticipated what was coming. Everything wasn't all right in Dylan's world, however. Many of his friends noticed he was ignored by those who didn't know him, possibly for his physical disposition, as he was tall and lanky. His parents later felt that Dylan was unhappy, but had failed to see the clues and signs alluding to it. It was during their time at Columbine that both Eric and Dylan began to go off the tracks. It was only in his first year here that Eric staged a fake suicide. This was in order to scare Tiffany Teifer, a student from his German class whom he took to the homecoming dance that year. As she spurned Eric's request to take her on a date, he decided he needed to teach her a lesson. Eric laid on the ground, covered in fake blood, and was able to convince his friend Brooks to lead Tiffany to the scene so they would discover him. Well, needless to say, Tiffany never spoke to Eric again. The only interaction the two had in the future was when Eric wrote in her yearbook the phrase Ich bin Gott, or I am God in German, referencing their time in class together. This wasn't specifically targeted at Tiffany, as he also wrote the same thing in Nathan Dykeman's as well. In their second year at the school, 1997, both Eric and Dylan began working for Blackjack Pizza, and got into a great amount of mischief while employed there. They had a love of pyromania, and were lovers of fireworks, setting them off frequently and using them to booby-trap the back fence by the alley. One shift, they even felt it necessary to start a fire in the sink of the pizza shop's kitchen, catching aerosols on fire in a mop bucket. At one point, they were let go from their jobs at Blackjack Pizza after the owner discovered that Dylan had brought a pipe bomb to work. The two were often known to buy dry ice from the nearby Baskin-Robbins ice cream stores to make little bombs, which they detonated behind the pizza shop. It was around this time as well that Eric and Brooks Brown began to go their separate ways. It was spurred on because Brooks had a tendency to run late when picking Eric up for school. As a result, Eric would often come aboard him and yell at him, and apparently he went too far, one too many times. Eric also wasn't providing Brooks with promised gas money, so Brooks eventually cut Eric loose. In retaliation, Eric smashed the windshield of Brooks's car, lit firecrackers off near the windows of his family home, and harassed Brooks's family in other ways, and then posted about the things he did online. Eric eventually gave an apology to the family after they had advised the police of his misdoings. One of the more disturbing things the police uncovered was Eric's hit list, a website that he kept and actively contributed to that contained all the names of individuals that he wished harm upon. It can be noted that as recent as today, the police have never officially released the list in an unredacted form. The lead detective, Michael Guerra, also uncovered various rants Eric had posted and information about bombs that he and Dylan were constructing. There was a search warrant for Eric's house, drafted by Guerra, but it was never filed, so nothing ever came of it, and it was never executed. The pair eventually found their way further into the eyes of the law in January of 1988, when they were caught stealing a bunch of electronics equipment and stashing it in a van they had broken into. For their transgressions, given that they were first-time offenders and deemed low risk, they were given community service under the Juvenile Diversion Program. The judge also added stipulations to their sentences, being that they were never allowed to own guns. They, specifically Eric, stated to the judge and their parents that they were sorry and extremely remorseful for what they had done. When not in the public eye, however, Eric took to the internet, as he often did, to ensure the world knew what happened, and that he was displeased with it. The whole situation enraged him. Sensing something was seriously wrong, Eric's mother booked him appointments with a psychologist so that he could begin therapy for his anger management. Eric and Dylan apparently showed excellent progress in the juvenile diversion system, enough to be released from community service early, and were even provided with high recommendations from their supervising staff. On the surface, to the average person, Eric and Dylan were two young men trying to find their way in the world, even if, at times, they didn't seem like the two most perfect individuals. But underneath were monsters far too terrible to imagine. Into the later parts of 1998, they created a project for their film class, which showed the pair shooting various friends, who were dressed up as jocks, and a video that finished with special effects of detonating Columbine High School. They came to embrace their well-practiced German language skills, even using it to berate other students, and were often heard shouting Sieg Heil, the phrase made famous during the rule of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany, showing allegiance to the Führer, Adolf Hitler, when they made a good play in their bowling club. It was around this time that the boys started scheming, drafting plans in various journals and notebooks which outlined them killing students, showed schematics of the school, its layout, and even noted times in which large groups of students would be together and where those locations would be. One thing that was very prevalent in the boys' lives were computers and the internet. Out of the two, Eric's online presence was extremely more noticeable than Dylan's, and the two set up computers on the same network, as they were both fans of the now iconic PC game, Doom, and its sequel, Doom 2, a game filled with weapons, violence, and demonic imagery, things that would be found much later in Eric's journals. He even wrote a short story for a literacy class based on the game. He spoke of collecting ammunition, weapons, and bearing witness to piles of bodies. Sick, right? Oh, his teacher thought it was something and gave him a C+, with the comment, "Yours is a unique approach, and your writing works in a gruesome way. Good details and mood setting." Well, I guess you could say he set a mood, or something else that day. The web pages he created even received a good amount of traffic, even more so after the future events of Columbine broke. On many online profiles, he referred to himself as a professional Doom player, wrote some responses to questions in basic German, and labeled himself schizophrenic. Signing off his AOL profile was written the Latin phrase "Si vis pacem parabellum," or more plainly, if you want peace, prepare for war. It has since surfaced that Eric had profiles on ICQ, saying things like, "Goodbye to all, April 20, 1999, and preparing for the big April 20. You'll all be sorry that day. It's important to clear this up, that most of these profiles, like the ICQ ones, were fake, in addition to other sites being built, of other students across the state claiming to be Eric, that were actually created by those elsewhere in Colorado. On the 17th of April, 1999, only 3 days before the events, the Columbine High School's prom was held. Curious to note is that prior to the prom, Columbine, like most high schools, was adorned with posters and advertisements that read, "It's coming, 4/17/99. It was later noticed that on many of the posters, the number 17 had been crossed out, and 20 was instead written. No one yet knew why, but the vandalism of the posters was really a sign of foreshadowing. Dylan attended the senior prom on the 17th. He rode in a limo, accompanied by 12 other people. Among them was his date for the evening, Robin Anderson, a friend whom he had met years earlier. I convinced my friend Dylan, who hates dances, jocks, and has never had a date, let alone a girlfriend, to go with me. A friend of hers recalled her saying shortly before the prom, "I'm either really cute or just really persuasive." That evening, the pair were only attending as friends, as their relationship was purely platonic. According to Dylan's friend Nathan, Dylan was in great spirits that evening. He talked about everything being perfect. He was excited for the following year, where he was to continue his education at the University of Arizona, and he already had a good many plans dreamt up for his life. Only a few short weeks earlier, the Klebold family drove down to the university to check it out, and let Dylan pick out his dorm room, which they had put a deposit down for. Eric tried to find a date for the prom too, however wasn't able to find any girl that agreed to go with him. It wasn't for a lack of trying, but all had turned him down. Instead, he stayed in that night, watching movies with Susan DeWitt, a girl he had met on shift at the pizza shop only a day prior. Eric's future looked different than Dylan's, for his wish was to enlist in the United States Marine Corps, a dream in which he started taking steps to apply to. He made it past the initial process, and was scheduled for further testing. Eric arrived on time to that testing in his gray 1986 Honda Civic. He wore black pants, black combat boots, and a black Rammstein t-shirt. He ended up doing all right, scoring average on his screening test. A few days later, he met with his recruiter and scheduled a home visit. Though Eric didn't declare that he was taking it on his application, at his home visit a few days later, his mother asked the recruiter if he would be able to join, though he were taking an antidepressant. Eric knew that his mother had quite likely sealed his fate, but the recruiter told him he would check into it, took down the name of the prescription off the bottle Eric's mother had produced. The recruiter called a few days later, leaving a voicemail which was never returned. Eric never found out the result, and a few days before the events at Columbine, Eric's application to join the Marine Corps was rejected. The rejection came because of the drug he was prescribed, fluvoxamine maleate, or Luvox for short, a powerful antidepressant that he was prescribed for his anger management. The drug is heavily cautioned for use in teenagers, as some of the side effects include an increase in violent tendencies and the ability to trigger suicidal thoughts. It was through Dylan's relationship with Robin that he was able to procure 3 firearms, 2 sawed-off shotguns, and a rifle, all that formed part of their future arsenal. Because the boys were younger than 18, Robin had to act as the go-between, brokering a deal in December of 1998. The boys attended the dealer with her, asking a multitude of questions. The only thing they needed Robin for was to hand over the money when asked to pay. Later, they purchased another weapon for the sum of $500, a Tech-9 from Philip Duran, a graduate of Columbine who also worked at the pizza shop and had previously procured the weapon for them from Mark Maines. Between the 16th and the 18th, many of Eric's neighbors heard a great amount of noise coming out of his family's garage. They had known for the past few weeks that Eric, who was normally seen out and about, stayed inside and isolated himself from many other people. They heard the sounds of breaking glass and power tools, but couldn't place exactly what he was doing. On the 19th, the boys skipped class in the afternoon, even failing to rendezvous with Brooks Brown and another student, Becca Hines, for lunch. That afternoon, many of the same sounds at Eric's house that had been heard the day before were again noticed. Dylan also had a journal entry in his notebook that day which read, "About 26.5 hours from now, the judgment will begin. Difficult, but not impossible. Necessary, nerve-wracking, and fun. What fun is life without a little death? It's interesting. When I'm in my human form, knowing I'm going to die, everything has such a touch of triviality to it." He went on to detail their plans for the following day. Walk in, set bombs at 11:09 for 11:17. Leave, set car bombs, drive up to Clement Park, gear up, get back by 11:15, park cars, set car bombs for 11:18, get out, go to Outside Hill, wait. When the first bombs go off, attack. Have fun. That night, the pair were able to procure more ammunition, again from Mark Maines, from their local Kmart. Eric only told Mark that they needed the ammunition for the next day, and nothing else. Though the boys had made many tapes leading up to the attack, where they outlined their plans, talk about their parents, show off their weapons, and name students who would be judged, and more. They were airing everything that had led them to this point. Their final tape was made on the 20th of April, approximately 30 minutes before the attack, in the living room of Harris's family home. Though these tapes have never been released in complete form, afraid that it might inspire copycats, there is a transcript of that tape which reads as follows, leading off with Eric. "Say it. Now." "Hey, Mom. Gotta go. It's about half an hour before our little judgment day. I just want to apologize to you guys for any crap this might instigate or something. Just know that I'm gone to a better place. I didn't like life too much, and I know I'll be happy wherever I go. So I'm gone. Goodbye, Reb." "Yeah, everyone I love, I'm really sorry about all this. I know my mom and dad will be just shocked beyond belief. I'm sorry, alright? I can't help it. Well, we did what we had to do. Morris, Nate, if you guys live, I want you guys to have whatever you want from my room and the computer room. Same for me. Susan, sorry. Under different circumstances, it would have been a lot different. I want you to have that Fly CD. That's it. Sorry. Goodbye. Goodbye." The last image we're given is an obstructed view of the letters CHS with the drawing of a bomb and a lit fuse. Written beside it, in bold black letters, was the word clue. It was time. The boys set their plan into action. The following events are taken from the narrative timeline of events drafted by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Around 10 after 11, Eric arrived at the school, followed shortly by Dylan in his 1982 black BMW. They parked their vehicles in different parts of the lot strategically on the sides of the school cafeteria and the entrances to the lower level of the school. Harris was seen speaking to a student, that we already know was Brooks Brown, and left shortly thereafter. At 11:14, the pair leave their cars and walk into the school's cafeteria with the large duffel bags that Brown had seen them taking out. The 2 bags were packed with enough explosive material to kill the majority of the students who would be present in the cafeteria for the first lunch period. They dropped the bags off and left the cafeteria, returning to their cars. The bags weren't noticed, as they blended in with near 400 other bags in the cafeteria at the time. The propane bombs were rigged to explode at 11:17, the time that Eric and Dylan noticed was a peak height for the cafeteria, and the largest numbers of students would be present there. From their cars, they could clearly see the cafeteria, their vantage point, to pick off any students that came running out after the bombs went off. The only thing they couldn't figure out was, why weren't the bombs going off? A short distance away, the diversionary bomb on Wadsworth Boulevard went off as it was supposed to. The law enforcement were quick to respond.
Attention South Units, have a report of what appears to be an explosion. It sounded like an explosion. Northbound on Wadsworth between Chatfield and Ken Carroll. The fire department's been advised. 147. 147. Happy cleared around. Take a look at that area. Okay, copy. 1121.
The boys couldn't wait any longer. After all, their vehicles were set to explode as well. They left their cars, armed with 4 weapons, many knives, and many handmade explosive pipe bombs. Dylan and Eric made their way up the hill from the parking lot, heading to the school's west entrance. It was here the first students noticed the trench coat mafia. The boys were wearing black trench coats and carried with them a duffel bag and a backpack. Only when, likely, Eric gave the order, "Go, go," did the situation begin to start. They began opening up on the students below with the 9mm weaponry from under their jackets. The first bullets to find their mark were those that killed Rachel Scott and injured Richard Castaldo. 2 students who were eating lunch on the side of the hill. 3 other students heading out to the smoke pit. Daniel Rohrbaugh, Sean Graves, and Lance Kirkland were caught up in the gunfire. All were hit and fell to the ground. Eric and Dylan then shifted focus to another group of 5 students on the hill and fired upon them. Many of the students were able to make it to the athletic shed and took cover, but Michael Johnson was hit on the way. Another student, named Mark Taylor, was hit and injured so badly he wasn't able to get away with the other group. Dylan began making his way down the stairs toward the entrance. Eric continued firing from atop the stairs. He fired into the west entrance doorway, with those on the other side being struck with shrapnel from the glass breaking. Wanting to see that business was taken care of, Dylan Klebold shot Daniel Rohrbaugh again at close range, ending his life. Before moving on, Dylan put another bullet in Lance Kirkland, who, though severely wounded, survived. Dylan looked into the cafeteria to see why their propane bombs hadn't gone off, but couldn't find any answers. He raced back up the stairs to reunite with Eric. Eric picked off student Anne-Marie Hochhalter, shooting her multiple times while she tried to run for the cafeteria. Above the gunfire, the phrase was heard by a witness, "This is what we always wanted to do. This is awesome." Unknown if it was said by Eric or Dylan. It was around this time the school's custodian was in the process of changing the recording tape in the camera system. When he went to hit record on the new tape, he noticed that students in the cafeteria were crowding around the windows. Something strange was going on. He got on the phone with Sheriff's Deputy Neil Gardner, the Columbine High School's police liaison officer, and told him that he was needed in the back lot of the school. Over the next few minutes, calls came pouring in to 911, both from people at and near the high school.
911, what's your emergency? Apparently there's been a
here at Columbine High School.
Okay. We've got people on the way. Do you have any more information?
No, I don't. I got about 20 kids here in my house. I live just south of it.
Okay, you're at West Polk. Okay, I want you to keep everybody right there, okay?
All right.
And if you can, if you don't mind, keep them inside.
All right.
Okay?
Will do.
Okay. Jefferson County 911, what is your emergency?
I just called about gunshot.
Yes, ma'am.
It's at the school at Columbine.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, we do have people on the way down there.
All right.
Okay. Can you still see those guys with those guns?
No, we ran down the neighborhood and we're at residence.
Okay, and what's your name, sir?
Jake?
Home?
No, I don't know this person.
Okay, can I get your phone number at home?
Yeah.
And what is your home address? South Vance?
Yeah.
Can you tell me any?
We just heard a bunch of gunfire, saw the explosions, and saw a bunch of kids run and hide behind the building.
One person was hiding behind the building?
And some people said they saw people falling down
Okay.
after gunshot.
Okay, alrighty. If you can remember anything else, give me a call back. Otherwise, what I'm going to ask you to do, if you've got any friends with you, is just stay out of the area of danger and just stay where you are now, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
The most chilling was the caller who said that there was a girl down in the south parking lot, and it was believed she was paralyzed. Deputy McGore, who was already responding to the diversionary explosion at Wadsworth Field, headed for Columbine, as does Deputy Paul Smoker, who was conducting a routine traffic stop nearby. The same call for assistance is heard by Neil Gardner. When the report came across the radio, female down in the south lot of Columbine High School, he knew it was for real. He flicked on his lights and sirens as he heads towards the south parking lot. Many of the school's faculty are still in the dark, however. In the midst of it all was Coach William Sanders, who went by Dave. When he and the school custodians John Curtis and Jay Galatine entered the cafeteria, they began to direct students to find shelter, with most taking cover under the tables. One of the first teachers to get eyes on Eric and Dylan was Patty Nielsen, a teacher at the school who was on hall monitor duty at the time. She didn't know much about the situation or who was causing the commotion, but she did notice the trenchcoat mafia, 2 students with believed toy guns. She didn't think much of it, as it was quite possibly a video production for one of the classes. As she was on her way to shut it down, it became all too real, as bullets began flying into the west entrance doorway, sending glass fragments flying into the hallway, striking her in the shoulder, the forearm, and the knee. Also hit was student Brian Anderson, who was told to leave the school by another faculty member after the first explosions were heard. The 2 left the scene and took shelter in the school's library. Just as Nielsen and Anderson get away, Deputy Gardner's patrol car came screaming into the parking lot, sirens sounding and lights ablaze. As he exits his patrol car, the bright yellow uniform as school liaison catches the attention of Eric Harris, who fires 10 rounds at the deputy. Gardner returned fire with 4 shots of his own, thinking he hits Eric, who was hunched over trying to clear a jam from his weapon.
Go ahead. You broke off. You have the shooter? I'm under fire. Copy, 71. 71, I copy. They went back into the building. We're getting a report of 2 suspects in trench coats back into the building. Copy, you can't move. 1133. 71, your location? I'm in the back street lot. For 135, I thought he said he was under fire. Inside the building now. That's affirming. He said he's under fire in the back student lot.
The boys, still engaged in a firefight with Gardner, begin to move to the west entrance of the school. Dave Sanders needed to act fast and begins shepherding the students out of the cafeteria, telling them to head for the second level and get out of the east entrance. This great amount of students leaving is captured on the school's surveillance system. As Eric and Dylan enter the cafeteria, there was essentially no one left. As the shooters made their way out of the cafeteria, they took the nearby stairwell up to the second level. Simultaneously, the Jefferson County sheriffs put out the call over the airwaves that possible shots have been fired at Columbine High School and one student is down. Patty Nielsen also picks up the phone in the library's front desk to call 911, a call that's distressing and then terrifying as gunshots begin to resound close to the library before she's forced to hang up.
Jefferson County 911.
Yes, I am a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun. He has shot out a window. I believe one kid has shot. I've been
Columbine High School.
I don't know what's in my shoulder. If it was just some glass coming through, what?
Okay, has anybody been injured, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and the school is in a panic, and I'm in the library. I've got students down under the tables, kids. Heads under the tables. Kids are screaming. Some of the teachers are, trying to take control of things. We need police here.
Okay, we're getting them there.
Police here.
Who is the student, ma'am?
I do not know who the student is.
Okay.
I saw a student outside. I was in hall duty. Oh, dear God. Okay. I was on hall duty. I saw a gun. I said, what's going on out there? And it said, oh, it's probably for video protection. It's probably a joke. I said, well, I don't think that's a good idea. And I went walking outside. I could see this down. See what was going on. He turned the gun straight at us and shot. And my God, the window went out. And the kid standing there with me, I think he got hit.
Okay.
Something in my shoulder.
Okay. We've got help on the way, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, God.
Stay on the line with me.
Oh, God. Kids, just stay down.
Do we know where he's at?
I'm sorry?
Do we know where he's at?
Okay. I'm in the library. He's upstairs. He's right outside of here.
He's outside?
He's outside of this hall.
Outside of the hall or outside?
In the hall.
Okay.
Library. There are alarms and things going off now. Smoke. My God, smoke is like coming into this room.
Okay.
I've got the kids under the tables here. I don't know what's happening in the rest of the building. Also, that smoke in the building. I don't know. I'm sure someone has to be calling 911 beside
Yes,
me.
we've got a lot of people on. Okay. I just want you to stay in the line with me. We need to know what's going on.
Okay.
Okay?
I am on the floor.
Okay. And you've got the kids
in the
there?
library. And I've got every student in this library on the floor. You better stay on the floor.
Is there any way you can lock the doors?
Smoke is coming in from out there, and I'm a little afraid. The gun is right outside the library door, okay? I don't think I'm going to go out there.
Okay, you're at Columbine High School?
I got 3 children.
Okay, we got it.
Okay? I'm not going to go to the door to shut the door, okay? I've got the kids on the floor. I got all the kids in the library on the floor.
We have paramedics, we have fire, and we have police en route, okay, sir?
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
I don't know. I can't believe he's not out of bullets. He just keeps shooting and shooting and shooting.
Okay, yeah, we've got a police officer on scene.
I thought it was.
Okay, just try and keep the kids in the library calm.
Yeah.
Is there any way you can block the door so no one can get in?
I do not.
Okay.
I guess I can try to go, but he's right outside that door. I'm afraid to go to the door.
That's okay.
That's where he is. I'm afraid to go there. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, I told the kids to get on the floor. I told them to get under the table. All of the children are on the floor under the tables. Yeah, they're all under the tables.
Okay.
And
as long as we can just try and keep...
No one's saying a word.
Okay, as long as we can keep everyone there as calm as we can.
I hear some yelling out there going on right now.
Yeah, we've got alarms going off now as well.
Yeah, there's alarms. This room is filled with smoke.
Okay.
Okay.
Keep everyone low to the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's up. Okay. Everyone stay on the floor. Stay on the floor. Stay under the table. Okay. I don't know.
Okay, I know, just...
I don't know. I said, what is that kid got? He was outside at the time. And I was on hall duty. Oh, God. And he's like, going, woo-hoo-hoo.
I know.
There's things that are being shut off. I do not know who the student was. I don't even think I saw him. He was wearing black. He didn't look very large. Male student. He was out there shooting. It looked like he was pointing out and shooting. And I said, what is that? I said, what's going on out there? She said, yeah, Kat said, it's probably for video productions. You know, they do these video productions. And the kids, I said, well, that's not, you know, a play gun, a real gun. I was going out there to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And I went walking. I said, oh, my God, that was really close. That just rattled me.
Okay.
So bad. I'm really, I think he's
What's your name, ma'am?
My name is Patty.
Patty?
He's yelling at everybody to get up right now. He's in the library. He's straight up.
What you heard at the tail end of that 911 call was Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold getting access to the library. Among the screaming and the yelling from them was the phrase, "Get up. Everyone get up." We'll come back to this moment in time in just a minute. Jefferson County's dispatch received confirmation that shots had been fired at Columbine High School. Deputies Scott Taborski and Paul Smoker had arrived on the school's west side and were beginning to aid wounded students on the west side of the school. Here, they were engaged by rifle fire from Eric Harris in the northwest entrance. Deputy Gardner put out code 33 over the air. Officer in need of emergency assistance, more or less, an all units respond call. As Eric is engaging the officers outside the entrance, Dylan fired his weapon in the main hallway, some bullets hitting students, while others rattled off the side of lockers. As Eric rushed to meet him, one witness recalled the boys firing their weapons and laughing. One of the students hit was Stephanie Munson. She was struck in the ankle, but able to make it to safety. As their murderous spree continued, Eric and Dylan came to a stop in the main hallway by the payphones as they engaged students trying to leave the school. They stopped dead in their tracks, likely fearing an armed response on the other side. By this point, the hallways of the school had cleared out, or everyone had found somewhere to shelter in place. Eric and Dylan began firing rounds at will, all in an effort to destroy the school. They shot up lockers, fired into empty classrooms, and even tried to blow up a science lab with a pipe bomb. Suspiciously enough, some of the classrooms in which people were sheltered, they bypassed completely. Their next target was the library. Still making efforts to evacuate the school, Dave Saunders goes running by the library and encounters one of the assailants. He tried to escape into an adjacent hallway, but was shot before rounding the corner. Sanders was able to pull himself into the science hallway where he was assisted into Science Room 3 by faculty member Richard Long and was administered first aid by Eagle Scouts Aaron Hansey and Kevin Starkey. Sanders ended up making the ultimate sacrifice for his heroics that day, being fatally wounded and passing away a few hours later, as emergency services were unable to get to him in time. Dave Sanders died, saving countless lives. Dave Sanders was a hero. Eric and Dylan paced the hallway outside the library for about 3 minutes, firing off their weapons and detonating a number of pipe bombs, all of which can be heard in Patty Nielsen's call to 911. All the while, sheriff's deputies are setting up roadblocks outside the school. The shooters are overheard yelling in the hallway, although not believed to be at anyone specific. As Eric and Dylan gained access to the library, they gave the order, "All jocks stand up. Everyone with a white cap or a ball cap stand up." Not a soul moves. They spray fire from their weapons wildly, not aiming at any person directly. Only after which did they decide who they would target. The first victim, shot to death, was a special needs student sitting in his chair. He couldn't take cover. As they made their way through the library, they decided who they would kill and who they would pass by. They sprayed the front counter with bullets, causing flying wood shrapnel to hit a student. Then, they shot out the west-facing windows and were engaged from law enforcement from that direction. Though random executions weren't in their playbook that day, they carried them out nonetheless. One male student was allowed to leave. Many others were shot dead. Some with multiple aimed shots. Eric and Dylan regaled their victims with stories that they shouldn't have been alive by that point anyway. The boys made sure the other students knew they were going to die. The school would be blown up, and the world would end and absolutely nothing would matter after that. By the time either their thirst was sated or they got bored, they had killed 4 students and injured a further 4 in the west area of the library, and killed 3 and injured 5 in the east and main areas. Overall, in the library, the worst of the massacre, in all of 7.5 minutes, 10 people were killed and 12 were wounded. There were 56 people that took shelter in the library, and only 34 remained unharmed. After Eric and Dylan left, some students escaped out the side entrance, but most were too afraid to move, or couldn't because of injury. Eric and Dylan moved back into the science hallway, continuing to try to find a way to blow up the school. Many of their repeated attempts failed, including lighting the chemical storage room on fire. They returned to their initial plan, heading back down towards their propane bombs in the cafeteria. Their only success in blowing anything up was detonating one of the propane bombs that only shook the classrooms upstairs and blew out the cafeteria's windows. Eric sat down and tried shooting at one of the bombs in the duffel bags, but it failed to explode. The shooters stopped for a moment to take a drink of water and were resigned to their fate. Today, the world's gonna come to an end, a witness recalled one of them saying, "Today's the day we die." As they began to head back to the second level, Eric and Dylan knew one thing. They failed. In every aspect. They failed to blow up the school they hated so much. They failed to make everyone on their list pay for how they treated them. They failed to kickstart the revolution they so believed would begin with their acts that day, and they failed to inspire others to join. And Eric and Dylan would die, both knowing they failed. As they continued through the halls, they looked into locked classrooms, even making eye contact with students, although they never attempted to gain entry, which, armed with weapons and bullets, it would have been very simple had they chosen to. The pair had lost their way. Their rampage lost its direction. Around this time, many law enforcement agencies had begun to show up. Members of the Denver and Littleton police forces, and even Jefferson County Special Weapons and Tactics. Many students had escaped by this point, and began telling the police that one of the assailants was Reb, Harris's nickname. Around 12:02 p.m., the combined SWAT team began to make their way towards the school, using a fire truck that had arrived to provide medical assistance. They were engaged by gunfire from second-story windows, as Harris and Klebold had returned to the library, returning fire to engage the shooters. Keeping the boys pinned down allowed paramedics enough time to rescue injured students Sean Graves, Lance Kirkland, and Anne-Marie Hochhalter. The 4th student, Daniel Rohrbaugh, was dead. The first team to gain entry into the school is SWAT Deputy Alan Simmons' team, entering through the southeast doors. As they made their way through the school, the final shots were fired out the windows of the library, and then things went quiet. Shortly after their final engagement with law enforcement, Eric Harris, the callously brutal mastermind, and Dylan Klebold, the crippling depressive, shot themselves in the library, never coming to face what they had done in the 58 minutes since their rampage began. Eric stuck the barrel of his sawed-off shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger, while Dylan shot himself through the left temple. There was no justice for families of the victims. The families of Harris and Klebold lost their sons, and the world was left to wonder. Why? Over the next few hours, the school is swept to ensure there are no further armed assailants inside. Students and faculty are provided medical attention, and a nation, brought to its knees, is left to pick up the pieces of their shattered reality. None at the time knew it, but this event wasn't an end. It was a beginning. Today, we know the names of other mass school shootings in the United States that chill us to the bone. Names like Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and Santa Fe, just to name some. It's tough to admit, but Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold didn't fail in their ultimate goal at all. They didn't light the fuse of the revolution they had hoped to, but they were the inspiration for shooters, for mass future murders, who did the exact same things they did. As I move toward the ending, I want you all to know that there are a great many more nuanced details than I told you about. It was important to give you most of the facts, and if you're interested in truly digging more into the Columbine story, I highly suggest you read further, as there's lots more information out there. It has been almost 25 years since the massacre at Columbine High School, and its legacy survives into modern day. The world has never learned the lessons taught to it by Harris and Dylan Klebold. School shootings are still happening. Children are still losing their lives. All the while, we stand by and watch, and the people that are in power do nothing to help it. I understand, all the while, that as we ratchet down gun laws more tightly, that there are ways that bad people will still get these weapons. This episode was no soapbox from which to preach for gun law reform, or to advocate for more mental health resources, although the two are desperately needed. It was meant to bring attention to Eric and Dylan, their stories, and the things that led them to do what they did, so that we all might recognize warning signs, or pay closer attention to our children and our friends. Most of all, it was to remember those who lost their lives at Columbine on the 20th of April in 1999, and hope that each death can teach us that one life lost is too many. To the 13 students and faculty who died at the Columbine Massacre, let us never forget them. As a tribute to their memory, I'll say a little bit about who each really was to end our episode. And moreover, again, to show you that these aren't just names on a television screen or in a newspaper. These are human beings, and most of them were children. Cassie Bernal, 17 years old, known affectionately to her parents as Bunny Rabbit. She had a love of rock climbing and the movie Braveheart. When asked if she believed in God by Eric Harris, she defiantly answered yes, and was killed for it. Forever remembered as the girl who said yes, she was laid to rest in Golden, Colorado. Steve Kernell, 14 years old. He dreamt of being a Navy Top Gun pilot. He loved his parents. He loved the color green because it reminded him of the soccer fields, a sport he loved so much. He was also a huge lover of Star Wars. A memorial to Steve was formed in his honor. When Star Wars Episode 1 released only a month after he died, the movie he was so excited for and never got to see. Corey DePuter, 17 years old. He loved hiking, golfing, hunting, and fishing. He was a true outdoorsman. He made sure he did well in school and had a lifelong dream of joining the Marine Corps. Corey was shot dead in the library by Dylan Klebold. He was buried in Chapel Hill Memorial Gardens in Littleton, Colorado. A year after his death, at a special ceremony at his gravesite, Corey was welcomed into the Marine Corps as an honorary Marine. At his funeral was read the poem, "Let me go back from the traveled road, away from crowds pushing, to a quiet hill where the woods are still, serene, beneath a clear blue sky." Kelly Fleming, 16 years old, shy and creative. Kelly loved Halloween and dreamed of becoming a songwriter because of her love of poetry and short stories. She loved the school's library, and her stories always had happy endings. The girl who told her mother, "I'm not shy anymore," was shot and killed by Dylan Klebold in the library. She was honored by her father as one of the true leaders of the school. She was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, holding 2 teddy bears in her arms. Matt Kechter, 16 years old, was a star offensive lineman on the football team and played both ways. He had a great laugh, loved working out, and was an A student. He put academics first, knew he did well but never bragged. Matt is last remembered for taking a final stand with fellow victim Isaiah Scholes, grabbing the attention of Harris and Klebold to keep them away from other students. He was shot by Dylan Klebold and died shortly thereafter in the library. He was remembered as a wonderful role model. Matt was honored by the University of Colorado, where he planned to attend. The university shipped a jersey with his name and number 70 to his family. The next football season was dedicated to Matt, and he was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery. That September, he was posthumously accepted into the National Honor Society. Daniel Mauser, 15 years old, another bright A student who was unafraid to take on challenges, even becoming the top biology student in his class. He was a shy, gentle soul who was loving and had a fondness for trivia. He loved pepperoni pizza, The Simpsons, and The X-Files. Daniel was alarmed by the gun safety laws in America and pointed out glaring loopholes in the Brady Bill only weeks before his death. It was because of those loopholes, the exact ones he pointed out, that Harris and Klebold were able to procure some of the weapons that killed Daniel. He was shot in the head by Eric Harris while hiding under a table. He was buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery. Daniel Rohrbaugh, 15 years old. He loved electronics and computer games. There's much controversy surrounding his death, such that he may have been killed by friendly fire, although it seems unlikely. He was known for helping his family around their shop and was buried in Littleton Cemetery. William Dave Sanders, the 47-year-old computer and business teacher at Columbine. He coached the girls' basketball and softball teams. He was a teacher, a friend, and a mentor. He saved countless lives at Columbine High School, and his final words were, "Tell my family I love them." Dave Sanders died a hero and left behind his wife, 4 children, and 5 grandchildren. Columbine has since named the softball field in his memory, and even has a scholarship after him. He posthumously was awarded the Arthur Ashe Award for Courage. Rachel Scott, 17 years old, the first victim of Columbine. She was vibrant, straightforward, and not afraid to stand up for what she believed in. She was actively involved in the school's plays and had a love of photography. She was an aspiring writer and actress. She had a love of God and wanted to be a reacher of the unreached. She asked God, in her journals, for the opportunity to show others the way and live a life of purpose. Following her death, Rachel's car became a makeshift memorial in the school parking lot. She was buried at Chapel Hill Memorial Gardens in Littleton. Isaiah Scholes, 18 years old, an aspiring comedian who wanted to have a future career in music. He loved to play football and wrestle, overcoming a heart defect that he was born with. He played the keyboard and wants to become a record producer like his father. He was shot by Eric Harris in the library, next to Matt Hector, trying to draw attention away from other students. Isaiah was the only black person in the Columbine Massacre to be a casualty. He was the last student to be buried and rests in Fairmount Cemetery in Denver. Isaiah was honored by Martin Luther King III, Martin Luther King Jr.'s son, who spoke at his funeral. Josh Tomlin, 16 years old. He loved the outdoors and had a job at a local nursery hauling trees. He loved his church's youth group, where he met his girlfriend Michelle. He had recently gotten his driver's license and purchased an old Chevy pickup that he had worked for 3 years to buy. He had a love of four-wheeling and lifting weights. John even once drove to Mexico to help build a home for a poor family. Like Rachel Scott's, John's truck helped form part of the makeshift memorial, with his Bible still on the dashboard. John Tomlin was killed in the library, injured by Eric Harris, and killed by Dylan. He was returned to his hometown in Wisconsin and buried in St. Peter's Cemetery. His family had his coffin lined with satin, which showed pictures of Chevy trucks. Lauren Townsend, 18 years old, the senior captain of the volleyball team. Lauren was a member of the National Honor Society and was a front-runner for the honor of being named valedictorian. She loved to draw and was academically sound. She volunteered her time at an animal shelter and had future plans in the field of biology. She was killed in the library by Dylan Klebold after bleeding out from her injuries. She was placed into a white coffin, and her family allowed those who attended her funeral to write messages to Lauren on it. She was buried in Littleton Cemetery. And lastly, Kyle Velasquez, 16 years old. The gentle giant was a lover of helping his family, and though it didn't match his size, he was just a boy at heart. He loved helping his dad with renovations, mowing the lawn, and washing cars. He dreamt of one day serving in the Navy like his dad, or if that didn't work out, he wanted to be a firefighter. As a child, Kyle suffered a stroke that left him mentally disabled. His last words to his mother that day were, "Goodbye. I love you, Mom." And he kissed her on the cheek and went to school. He was just starting to find his stride at school and come out of his shell when he was passed in the library by Dylan Klebold and shot in the back of the head. For his burial, Kyle was given military honors and interred at Fort Logan in Denver, where his dad was active in the Navy. His parents were given the flags that adorned his coffin, in addition to the flag that was flown at the Capitol building in Washington for him. These are the 13 victims of Columbine, 13 lives that should never have been lost. And after all, one life is too many. This message brings to close the story of the Columbine Massacre, the assailants, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, in addition to the 13 lives they took that day. I hope you learned something from today's retelling and share the message that children should be safe to go to school and that one life lost is too many. If you learned something from this episode, please share it with a friend. This is too important of a story to be forgotten. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe so you can find your way back next week for another story about the fascinating secret endeavor known as Project Stargate. New episodes of the Insidious Agenda podcast release every Tuesday at midnight Eastern Standard Time. But for now, it's time to close the cover of the Insidious Agenda. I'll see you again next week, and thank you for listening to this story.